Alors, on a donc ces premières tables rondes sur l'époque moderne. Une première présentation de Massimo Carlo Giannini, de l'Université de Teramo et de la Complutense de Madrid, sur un sujet qui nous tient beaucoup à cœur à ReLRace, puisqu'il fait écho à l'une des journées d'études qu'on a déjà organisées sur l'effacement de la macule et les processus, les phénomènes d'exclusion au sein même des grandes religions monothéistes. Et donc Massimo va nous parler de l'exclusion dans l'accès à la prêtrise d'individus en raison de leur couleur. Et puis ensuite, on aura, alors peut-être que je présente, je ne sais pas comment on présente les deux d'un coup, et on aura une intervention de Mathilde Mougin, qui nous vient de l'Université d'Aix-Marseille, sur la racialisation des identités spirituelles dans les récits de voyages français aux Amériques et aux Antilles, donc également un panel pluridisciplinaire, parce que je crois que Mathilde Mougin vient d'études littéraires, c'est ça, et que Massimo Carlo Giannini est historien. Donc voilà, je laisse tout de suite la parole à Massimo, qu'on est ravi d'entendre aujourd'hui.
Thank you, first of all, thank you very much to Claude-Olivier Doron, Vincent Villemain, for accepting my proposal to participate to this very interesting workshop. For some years now, I have been dealing with the Catholic Church's prohibitions on the access to the priesthood of those considered unfit because of their skin color, ethnic or religious origin. Put simply, my focus is studying why Christians were not all the same if some were excluded from the sphere of priestly ordination, and how this fitted in with the ideal universalism of Christianity. I will try in my paper to set out some aspects of canon law of inclusion and exclusion to be understood as a legal casuistry, to relate them to the reflection of theologians and jurists, and finally to examine the practice in the early modern Catholicism. Irregularitas in Latin, in medieval and early modern canon law, refers to the inability of a person to receive minor and major orders and to exercise them. Since the early days of the Church, the causes of irregularity have been subject to numerous definitions. Especially many authors agreed about the fact that neophytes, i.e. the recently converted or baptized, could not be ordained priests because their knowledge of the faith was considered limited and they were at the risk of improper behavior. The causes of irregularity were identified with a wide range of personal conditions, such as infamy, the so-called illegitimate origins, I mean the birth outside of wedlock or from a relationship between a priest and an unmarried woman, or between a nun and an unmarried man. Any kind of crime, such as murder, theft, sacrilege, adultery, bigamy, slander, and so on. Additionally, there were conditions such as slavery and bodily defects, physical impairments, or mental deficiencies, such as insanity, that precluded ordination. The Jewish, Muslim, and heretical descent was another typical case of irregularity. It should be noted that only the Pope could grant dispensations from the various forms of irregularity. This explains why, as well, we see numerous requests for dispensation for priestly ordination reached Rome during the early modern period from all the Catholic world. The popes were assisted by a series of tribunals, such as the Apostolic Penitentiary, and cardinal congregations, such as the Holy Office, established in 1542, and the Congregation of Council, established in 1564, which were responsible for evaluating petition based on criteria that were not always clear and consistent. An important building block in the cultural, religious, and social construction of exclusion from the priesthood was the complex relationship with the two known religious denominations and related communities in the Middle Age Europe, Jews and Muslims. Also, when converted, the religious lives of the category of the new, so-called new Christians was continually called into questions. They were the typical case of neophytes. In this sense, a 15th century a very important Dominican theologian, Juan de Torquemada, called a bestial error to consider neophytes, even the children of converts, baptized at birth, a subject on which there would be intense debate and profound differences of opinion. The important point is the passage in the Pauline letter, the letter of St. Paul to Timothy, the first letter to Timothy, that his exegetes consider to be the basis for the exclusion of neophytes from the priesthood. Between the 16th and 17th century, an extremely rich and complex debate developed between Catholic theologians and jurists on the causes and consequences of canonical irregularities. In 1554, the illustrious Salamanca canonist Diego de Covarrubias stated that neophytes could be promoted to ordination and ecclesiastical benefits if the bishop deemed them sufficiently educated in Christian discipline and customs. The time factor was also of significance, since according to the jurist, those who until recently professed a false religion were not even to be admitted to public office among Christians. Conversely, those who had been Christians from birth or childhood, even if they had Jewish or Muslim parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, were not to be considered neophytes. Another important author is Martín de Azpilcueta, professor of canon law in Salamanca and Coimbra, and he was author, among other things, of a well-known manual for confessors, first published in 1552 and reprinted several times. In this book, Azpilcueta declared that a baptized person, if descendant from heretic or his children, up to the second generation in the male line and the first in the female line, was irregular. In the same condition were El Moro, Judío or Gentil, the Muslim, the Jew, and the pagan, and of course, the neophytes. Azpilcueta emphasized that he deliberately used the expression recently converted and not new Christian, as people used to call new Christians those who had converted even 10 or 14 years earlier, who, however, did not incur this prohibition, just as their children did not, despite the bad habit of continuing to call them new Christians. This is the great problem, of course, of the limpieza de sangre. I cannot work now about this issue. It's very important that in the case of Portugal, a great issue of contrast between among the ecclesiastic people was the provision of ecclesiastic benefits. And in 1588, Pope Sixtus V issued a bull given the difficulty of identifying los nuevos cristianos, los cristianos novos, as they called in Portugal, who had fraudulently obtained the concession of benefices from the Holy See. He gave Cardinal Albert of Habsburg, who at that time held the post of Viceroy, Papal Legatus de Latere, and General Inquisitor of the Kingdom of Portugal, the power to authorize bishops to suspend the execution of apostolic letters of collection of benefices until there were certain about the quality, it has the absence of Jewish origins, of the provisions. Clement VIII in 1600 reaffirmed the Sistine Disposition, specifying that access to any kind of Portuguese ecclesiastical benefits should remain precluded to new Christians and to those who had Jewish blood up to the 7th generation. Moreover, all the assignments already made that had violated these dispositions were declared null and void. Finally, in January 1611, Paul V decided, with the advice of the Roman Congregation of the Holy Office, to make final and perpetual what had been decided by his predecessor. These papal interventions must be read in the context of the contrast that opposed the chapters of the Lusitanian cathedrals to the Roman Curia. As Hugo Ribeiro da Silva has well shown, the 3 papal bulls were a result of pressure from the leadership of the Lusitanian churches supported by the crown. Their application was, however, by no means easy, as much for the evident instrumentality of the rules excluding new Christians from access to ecclesiastical benefits, as for the continuous and numerous exceptions that the bishops themselves made. It can be interesting to read some interventions of the Roman Congregation of the Holy Office concerning Jewish descendants who aspired to priestly ordination. The first took place in October 1621, when Pope Gregory V, based on the petition of Luis Madeira of Lisbon, descendant of Jews, granted that the petition be transmitted to ordinary, who, at his discretion, could authorize the person to take the holy orders. In June of the following year, the same pontiff, the congregation, were called upon to decide on the case of 4 Lusitanians from the diocese of Lisbon, all of Jewish descent. Once again, Gregory XV established that the ordinary should authorize the interest parties to take holy orders up to the presbyterate, as well as ecclesiastical benefits, except for curates, canonicals, and dignities of collegiate churches. This has, of course, only 2 cases that cannot be generalized and will be better understood through further research. Nonetheless, they are useful to point out the Roman position on this issue in the form of requests for dispensations qualifying for sacred orders must be understood in the light of both canonistic and theological debates and the Holy See's desire to maintain the power of dispensation from the Limpieza de Sangue statutes in force in the Iberian Peninsula. Moreover, I just want to remember the work of Antonio Ricciulli, a prominent Roman jurist that published in 1622, the same a treatise on neophytes, and where he emphasized that they could not obtain priestly ordination, but he strongly limited the time frame of neophytes, only 1 year after receiving baptism. This position particularly concerned converted Jews, of course, who were subject, as we know, to significant processes of exclusion, and the work of Ricciulli was used by the Holy See
to justify its position, its dispenses to the priestly ordination of new Christians. Different problems we have with the mondialization of the Catholicism during the 16th and 17th centuries. Many jurists and theologians discuss about the problem of the new people outside Europe. For instance, a famous jurist, Bartolomeo Golini, in his treatise about irregularity at the beginning of the 17th century, defined neophytes as those who had not been Christians at birth and had been later converted. He listed Jewish, Turks, Saracens, and ethnics, a Latin term encompassing people from Africa, America, and Asia, excluding, of course, the famous Turks. He argued that bishops should decide on a case-by-case basis for these converts. On the other hand, people born from Christian parents were by no means considered neophytes. Therefore, they were not irregular and they were eligible for priestly ordination. This open position, however, was opposed by several authors. I cannot speak about them, but I just want to mention another famous theologian, the Spanish Trinitarian friar Leandro del Santissimo Sacramento, who in his work in 1678 developed a clear argument for the time. The black or dark color of the skin was not inherently a cause of irregularity. He noticed that only white people feared black skin and that there were therefore no reason for fear or scandal if black individuals were ordained to care for Africans and Afro-descendants persons. About the Amerindian neophytes, there is another chapter of works and position. It's important to remember the Jesuit José de Acosta and Agustinian friar Juan Zapata y Sandoval, two important theologians. De Acosta, citing St. Paul and the decisions of the councils of the early church, clearly prohibited access to priesthood for Amerindians and all those born from unions between Spaniards and indigenous women, known as mestizos, unless they had proven themselves to be of exemplary conduct. However, while he was provincial, he was a Jesuit. While he was Jesuit provincial in Peru, de Acosta disregarded his own theories and accepted some Creoles and mestizos in the Society of Jesus. The Augustinian friar Juan Zapata thought that the condition of neophyte ceased after 10 years, as did any impediment to ordination and access to ecclesiastical offices. Consequently, the people who were born in the New World and had been converted within 90 years, even though they had pagan parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, were no longer neophytes. Of course, we must not forget that the discussion about these issues intertwined with the normative developments in the new provinces and dioceses in the Americas. We have the first Provincial Council of Mexico, 1555, excluding from priesthood all individuals tainted by infamy or descendant from parents or grandparents
processed by Inquisition, or descendants from Muslims, mestizos, Amerindians, and mulattoes. The second provincial council of Lima, 1567, established that Amerindians, as recent converts, could not receive major orders. More strong was the third provincial council of Lima and the third provincial council of Mexico of 1585. But it's interesting that in the following century, the Provincial Council of Santo Domingo, 1622, departed from the traditional prohibition directed towards those who, on their father's side, were descended from individuals condemned by the Inquisition for 2 generations. It established that neither blacks nor mulattoes could receive holy orders. Their skin color was considered a reason of scandal. This clear-cut closure was partially mitigated by being limited to the first 3 generations and by the fact that those who had possessed not otherwise defined merits could be ordained, always on the condition that their ancestors had been well endowed with white color and exempt from any slave condition. Of course, the Amerindians were by nature defined as lovers of alcohol, and so because of their abject life, they were despised by all, according to the council, to the ordination. I have to cut my. I just want to mention that also in Asia, another important provincial council, the second provincial council of Goa in 1575, in the Estado da India Portuguese, also expressed the same view based on the words of St. Paul and the Church Council. The Indian people could not be admitted to holy orders until 15 years after conversion, and above all, they could not obtain the care of souls until 30 years had passed. Moreover, the decree established that Indian ordinands had to belong to high-level castes of the society, since the local Christians paid more respect to them, as well as enjoy a good reputation by caste and honest. But what was the Holy See's position in respect of all these questions? For its part, the Congregation of the Holy Office in July 1618 established that the title of neophyte could be attributed to natives with 4/4 of native blood and not to those who were half native and 1/8 part native. But the scenario began to display some signs of change after the foundation of the Congregation for the Propagation of Faith in 1622. Just from the year about 1628, the Congregation of Propaganda Fide, presided over by Pope Urban VIII himself, was very clear. Indians, they mean all the people from Asia and America, were suitable for the priesthood. But this decision, as often happened, remained on paper. In November 1630, a particular congregation about the Indies decided that the provision should be made so that the most suitable natives of the Indies, after a careful examination of their education and customs, and after a few years of probation, will be promised holy orders, included the priesthood. So there are a lot of other formal papal pronunciations all along the 17th century. It is evident that the different territories of the world, in the different territories, there were dynamics linked to very different political, social, and religious balances. The case-by-case practice is especially detectable in the 17th and 18th centuries Roman documentation. The Roman archives, in fact, contain a lot of papal dispensations for Muslim converts or the descendants from Jewish and Protestant who became priests. For instance, well, there is a case of 1759 when a cleric from Prague, son of Jewish parents and baptized at the age of 2, presented a petition to Rome, having doubts as to whether he needed a dispensation from irregularity. Well, the Congregation of Council replied that it was necessary. It means that the ideas of Ricciulli was now the practice after a century of the Congregation of the Council. There were also many petitions coming from the Lusophone world, where people asked to be promoted to the priesthood despite not having 4/4 purity of blood or not knowing the origin of their parents and grandparents. This is the case of Afro-descendants such as Bernardo Ludovico da Costa from Pernambuco in Brazil, who presented a petition to Rome in 1755 to obtain holy order. He was probably a mulatto, and Pope Benedictus XIV granted the Bishop of Pernambuco the faculty to ordain him, provided his suitability, and after verifying there were no other obstacles in canon law. There are many other cases until the end of the 18th century. I'm concluding. Throughout the early modern age, various types of interdictions existed regarding access to priesthood for those who, due to their skin color and or their origins, were considered unsuitable, marked according to the prevailing conception of the time by some stigma of infamy or moral and intellectual defects, in the most cases under the heading of birth defect. This judgment included converted from Hebraism and Islam and new European peoples, although not always and everywhere, and numerous individuals who descended from mixed unions, to whom the culture of the time attributed a specific and additional inferiority. It is important to recognize that the various terms used to categorize individuals based on seemingly objective elements such as religious origin, skin color, lineage, and somatic traits were the result of social and cultural construction that varied widely depending on the context. In the American, African, and Asiatic world, the terms indicating the types of children from mixed unions were not used automatically and indiscriminately. Various factors could play a role in whitening or giving him social, whitening a person, or giving him or her social legitimation for being mestizo and mulatto, sometimes by fully assimilating them to the Iberian element. By another side, the Holy See opted for a case-by-case strategy based on a series of subtexts that avoided highlighting the profound contradiction and lacerations that the issue generated for the Catholic Church. The complexity of the scenarios and the multiplicity of actors and interests involved made a range of solutions possible to an issue that had profound religious, social, and political implications. In other words, despite the many prejudices against them, New Christians, Afro-descendants, mestizos, and mulattoes were not always and everywhere excluded from ordination to the priesthood. In some cases, they could even manipulate extant contradictions within church and state to obtain ordination. Without any pretension of end with a subject so complex and still to be explored, I feel it's important to point out that the casuistry related to the Catholic world in the early modern age is very extensive. Considering the canonical regulation and juridical and theological literature in their interweaving with the documentation of the Apostolic See, it must be emphasized that the impact of local context was very important in this issue. This is made even more evident by the fact that the institution of the Roman Curia were not able to unify the different practices. So it maintained a certain flexibility in judging individual cases and establishing the relevant exception. Thank you. I hope to be clear and sorry for my bad English.